And hello, everyone, and welcome to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I'm your host, Coach Elix, with me, my wonderful co host,
Stephen Frederick, attorney slash medium, is also here today.
also here. And Steven, this should be a interesting and amazing show for you. Not that, every show should be interesting and amazing because you're co hosting with me, but today we have Frank Duran, who is
Frankie!
the Frankie, oh my, the executive producer director of the Lady of the Dunes documentary, and you had a little something to do with that documentary yourself. So aren't you excited to have Frank and to be able to, engage and ask questions about what's up?
Yeah, you know what? As exciting as it was, and God, was it ever to film Lady of the Dunes, it's as exciting now post production because of all the developments.
And that there's been plenty of. If you're tuning in for the first time today, we're talking about Lady of the Dunes and the very exciting breakthrough in this case. I mean, no matter where you are, no matter where you're listening from, you likely heard this in the headlines all across the country. And today we have the privilege to speak to the director himself, Frank Duran, who directed a documentary of Lady of the Dunes, about Lady of the Dunes, prior to the new development. So I'm excited. I'm excited to find out, what he knows and what's going on and what has happened post the documentary. But before we do that, Stephen, I know you also today, it's like an incredible, exciting day for you because the countdown is on for you to meet your heroes in New York City.
I can't even breathe, I tell you.
Yeah, he's not kidding people. He's obsessed with the Christmas spectacular and the Rockettes in New York City, and we've been going there. I have no choice in the matter, by the way, for years, and we have the same seats. It's front row. And I swear that he smiles, he looks at them, they wave back at him. They all know he's there because you are friends with some of the Rockettes on Instagram, right?
Well, from last year, so from that front row, I took a video of them, just a little clip. And when I posted it, two of them reached out to me and asked if I could share that video because the two that reached out were in the front row in the line. So you could see them so clearly, which was so cool. And then Radio City actually picked up my video. Well, they picked up my video and shared it, but didn't give me credit. And a couple of people that follow me, honestly, last year made comments that
they were irate.
Yeah, you didn't give credit to Stephen the Medium, and within an hour, they gave me credit right in the video. They just put compliments of Stephen the Medium. How cool was that?
So now Stephen is friends with his idols, the Rockettes, and all I've been listening to for the past, I don't even know how many days, is the countdown.
Well, I just sent you a clip yesterday, right, when you were at work?
Yeah, 2 days to go. I can't wait, and I see the same clip over and over and over and over.
Yeah, but there's a new dance. It's going to be. I cannot wait to see it. It's the Flight of the Fairies. I think that's what it's called. But it's going to actually have, I believe, like either snowflakes or fairies, like floating over the audience, which they used to do years ago with like snowflakes. But this is. I can't wait. I just can't wait. I'm dying. I tell you.
So joy. But we also, so we're going to New York City. This is super exciting. I love New York City during the Christmas time. Honestly, I don't think there's anything like it. And it's an experience that you have to have at least once in a lifetime. Would you not agree with that?
You know what? I was in juvenile court this morning, and one of my clients who is 17, I was telling her and her grandmother and her aunt that we were waiting for the judge to come out, and I was just talking to them and telling them that we were going to New York, and my 17-year-old client said to me, "Is the tree as big as it looks on TV, and I said to her, even bigger.
It's
It's just
bigger.
even bigger.
No,
It's breathtaking when you see it.
it's bigger, no question about it. So we get to see our nephew, our niece, and but also we have something big coming up, right?
You mean Golden Girls?
Well, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think that's categorized as
Huge,
big, right?
huge. Yes.
So what? Tell the audience what's that about?
So this is a pop-up Golden Girls, and it's in New York City that we'll be going to tomorrow. And these pop-ups recreate the sets of TV shows, events, many, many things. This happens to be Golden Girls. It was in LA, and then these pop ups never stay too long, and then they move to big cities. So when I got an email just letting me know that it was coming to New York. My fingers could not, like, I was so nervous. My fingers could barely get onto the website because I knew I wanted to coordinate when we were down there seeing the Rockettes if we could also do Golden Girls, and I did get tickets tomorrow.
Yep, and we tried to go to LA to make it, but we couldn't make it, so we missed out. We thought we missed out on that, and then all of a sudden, you discovered that they actually have a pop up in New York City when we're in New York City.
So yeah, tomorrow I think at 4 we're going, and they recreated the entire kitchen. I think they actually even recreated Blanche's bedroom. But we will be sitting in the kitchen with tables and get to have Sophia's lasagna. So Elix will have the regular lasagna, I'll have the meatless lasagna, and then we're going to have, of course, you cannot be anywhere in a Golden Girls environment without cheesecake. So that for dessert is cheesecake.
And we're in New York City, so
Yeah.
there is nothing like a slice of New York cheesecake. That's nothing like it. So
Yeah, I'm dying too with that. This weekend is just going to be phenomenal. And like you said, Elix, just, I told my client and again, her grandmother and aunt, there's nothing like as soon as you get, well, we take the train now. So when we get out of Penn Station, that smell of cold air and chestnuts, it just melts me away. It's the most beautiful. And I've been doing this since I was a kid, that we used to take the bus. My whole family, aunts and cousin Holly, used to go every year at Christmas time. So it is a tradition.
And if for those of you who know a little bit about Steven, he's an Eskimo. He loves the cold weather, and so he's been bragging over the last few days about how frigid New York is going to be, and that is the only way to experience Christmas in New York City.
It's going to be cold. It has to be cold.
Frigid, yes.
Listen, if you put me in Florida for Christmas time, you might as well just dig a hole and put me in there, because I would so not like it. It's Christmas. Listen, I'm a New England boy. Christmas is supposed to be cold, so.
So just a little dramatic, but that's what we get. But listen, don't judge. I mean, in all seriousness, we watch Golden Girls reruns every single day.
Yes.
Even the woman who, Lisa, who may be listening, she takes care of our boys. And when we travel, and she's like, oh, dear God, even the boys have to listen to Golden Girls. That's what they're used to.
It's on Hallmark, right? And we keep them.
Yeah, it's an ongoing thing. So going to this pop-up is actually, I am really excited about it. I'm really looking forward to it. So that's what's going on. But you also have a couple of things happening. So, why don't you tell our listeners what you're up to over the next couple of weeks?
So December 18th, I have a celebration in my office in New Bedford. It's a celebration because it's a brand new office, but it is also going to be wonderful. It's a Sunday afternoon, the 18th, and you can get tickets on my website, stephenthemedium.com. But I'm going to be doing some readings. There's going to be some Christmas cheer there, and just talking about just tips on how to handle the holidays with your loved ones in spirit, not here. And one thing too, I'm going to just briefly talk about spirit's perspective. We never hear that. We never hear that from anybody. We always just think about our perspective and wanting to feel and get signs from our loved ones. But I'm going to speak to, which, I incorporated that in one of my classes. What does spirit think?
And it's worth noting that our perspective is always comes from a very limited, place, because our perspective is limited. It's limited to our earthbound, knowledge and learnings. In spirit, I imagine that there's no such thing, right?
No, there isn't. And also in January, I think it's the 19th. I believe it's in the Sturbridge area. That is going to be a big event. It's a fundraiser, and I'm just working out the details now. But I think that's going to seat, I think, 160 people. So I am so excited. I can't get too excited yet because all my excitement right now is for the girls kicking and Golden Girls. Once I get past that, then I'll get really excited about January. But that will be coming. I've actually got to submit, some like biography and stuff in a picture to get the promotion going. So I'll give you more information about that when it's definite.
Excellent. And so, if you're listening, don't worry, because as soon as the Christmas spectacular at Radio City is done,
Oh,
he will be depressed for a few days, but as soon as the new shows for next year come up, he will be the first one to sign up, because I kid you not, we get the same seats every year. How do we do that? And now, I say we. I have nothing to do with it. I just, I'm
you show
collateral.
up.
I'm collateral damage. I just have to show up. But how does he do that? Well, he's one of the very first people to buy tickets when they come on. So,
I
you know,
cannot have a big head in front of me when I'm watching the Rockettes. It has to. I need no obstructions.
and we have absolutely none whatsoever. But anyways, listen, I think we're gonna be taking a break, and I'm excited because I can't wait to get this conversation going with Frank Durand, who is the executive producer director of the documentary Lady of the Dunes that was released back in April of 2022. But since then, as you may have already seen in the national headlines, there's been amazing breakthroughs, including, the identity. Now we know who the Lady of the Dunes is. So I can't wait to have that conversation with Frank, and I can't wait to have you explore with him, because you had a lot to do with this documentary. So
Yes.
I'm excited about that. So let's take a break. When we come back, we'll have our guest Frank Duran join us. We'll be right back. And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elix. I'm your host, Coach Elix. With me, my wonderful co-host,
Stephen Frederick is here.
attorney in medium, is here. Today, we're having a wonderful conversation about Lady of the Dunes, which is a very famous case. And we have the executive producer and director, Frank Durand, here with us. Frank is an independent filmmaker, a creative director, and a producer of the famous documentary Lady of the Dunes, which was released back in April of 2022. He is a man who wears numerous hats in filmmaking, which has enabled him to achieve a great success in his career. Now, Frank, of course, is known for bringing local history to life because of his success as an actor and creative director. Now, he is a Pisces, and he considers himself the son of a salesman with an eye for seeing the potential for film in local stories that people pass and ignore. He brings little known stories to life, and today we have the privilege to have him here with us talking about the exciting documentary that he produced and directed, Lady of the Dunes, and talking about the latest breakthrough in that case, which is now known, has hit the national headlines. So, Frank, welcome back and thank you for joining us.
I'm in need of a hat rack.
True, but nothing I said is short of exactly who you are.
And
now,
he's a papa, too.
He is. Oh, yeah,
yes, with
course.
his son Bryce.
He's a wonderful dad. But Frank, you are known for your documentary, Lady of the Dunes, a story about an unidentified woman whose murder remained unsolved for decades until very recently, which we discover her identity. Now, before we get into the new developments, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the story for anyone who doesn't know about the film?
Well, the Lady of the Dunes was the longest unsolved murder case in state's history up to October 31st, 2022, when they finally used DNA to discover her identity for the first time in almost half a century.
Now, there's been tremendous success in this case after the production of your documentary. Can you share with us any events that may have happened, and how do you think or what role did your documentary play in any of these developments, Frank?
Well, from the beginning, I was involved with this for about a solid 2 years. I was approached by some people in October 2020 during COVID to see if I would take on this, the efforts in producing a documentary and hoping to get her identity found. So it's been something I've been caring about for exactly almost 2 years from start to finish. We shot this in April of 2021, and it premiered a year later at the Cape Cinema, April 2022. So at the very least, I've been told by several people in law enforcement and in the community that we, in a good way and a bad way, we ticked off a lot of people. But I think in doing so, we also lit a lot of fires, where we were going back and research to 2017 when there were multiple offers on the table from outside groups like the DNA Doe Project out in California that was willing to help solve the case with DNA. So I think not just because of the documentary, but the noise we were making within the press and talking to multiple people at local, state, and federal level, I really feel that our efforts paid off by, motivating the powers to be.
And Frank, what was your major source of inspiration for taking on this documentary?
Well, the inspiration, I think, just as an artist in general, we want to work. We want to be asked to create a work of art. And, the ego comes into mind where I was approached. I was asked by multiple people because of my background. I produced a documentary on Henry David Thoreau's Cape Cod. And previous to that, I'd worked at infomercials. So I learned how to produce good content for very little money. We would say Apple quality at banana prices. So when they knew I was able to produce good content on an affordable budget, people wanted to invest in me and say, listen, we want you to make your talents meet the needs of the world. So, like I said, being approached and being asked, we want you to produce something, it got me invested in those 2 years to research, contact people from law enforcement to private investigators, psychic mediums, local historians, journalists, and then eventually produce the product that is known as the Lady of the Dunes.
Which brings me to that, my next question. Stephen the Medium, who happens to be our co-host, and somebody that is a good friend, and we got to know you through his participation in the film, in the documentary. Why did you decide to use a medium or mediums in the documentary?
Initially, when I reached out to the Meads family, this is Chief James Meads' sons, Michael and Jimmy Jr., they had told me that their father tried everything in his powers to help solve this case throughout the 70s and 80s. And one of the things he did was he flew out to California, he traveled to New York and Canada, and he also hired a psychic to see if the spiritual world could help bring some facts to the case with identifying this woman. So, out of respect for James Mead, part of this documentary was to educate the audience to say this is everything that had gone from 1974 to present date with her investigation. And part of that was to include the spiritual powers along with private investigation and also using the science of DNA to bring all three together to help solve this case.
Wow. And Stephen, for you, what was it like to be part of this documentary, this amazing documentary? What was that like for you?
Well, it was my first one, and when I received the email from Frank in 2021, I was extremely excited just hearing about it. And I didn't know anything about Lady of the Dunes, even living here. We had just moved to the Cape. But the greatest thing about this, working on this documentary and working with Frank, is that from the get-go, the energy that Frank, you brought to this was unlike, I think, anything that I had ever experienced. Because for you, it wasn't about how much money you can make. It was strictly just about bringing or shining the light on this unsolved murder. And to be part of this and to have it premiere in April, and 6 months later, after almost 50 years, to have this case solved, it's amazing doesn't cut it for me. It's just I don't know the adjective. All I can tell you is that I am so honored and just so thrilled that I am part of this documentary. And there's no question that what Frank, you did was just really pulling this over the finish line. That's what they needed.
I would agree with that.
Everybody who worked on this film, it was a labor of love. No one was like, I'll do it for X amount of money, or I got to be put up in a nice hotel. Everybody who signed on to this to be either in front or behind the camera, it was a true labor of love. And to defend me as a producer, if I did this at the start of my career, even 10 years ago, it would have been a disaster. I think in time I've learned to become immune to the stress that a general film brings on. So I was very lucky to have this fall in my lap at this time, because everything really came together to make this work on such a low budget and short production time.
No, Frank, in an interview you did with one of the Cape Cod news papers, you pointed out that your main focus in the production of the film was to discern between facts and fiction, especially in the murder. Was there a blurry line between those two in the story, within the story?
Well, just in general, things get fabricated over the years, because you're talking almost 50 years of the story taking on a life of its own by getting dates wrong, ages wrong, locations wrong, but also it becomes almost a mythical story, because in time it gained much more of a notoriety as opposed to just a simple murder. So interviewing people, one of the journalists I interviewed said you want to avoid Woodward and Bernstein syndrome, where don't believe anything that you hear, only what you see. And we heard a lot of things. We had people wanting us to investigate UFO abductions, the occult. Some people wanted me to contact members of the mob, members of national biker gangs. So this really was not just a Provincetown story. A lot of my phone calls were made from on the West Coast, talking to people through the FBI. So it was really trying to get as much information as possible, but then really push away all the fiction that has kind of taken over the story.
No, in your quest to bring the story to life, did you face any challenges in the production?
Yes, I won't say I was attacked, but a lot of people felt me coming into the story not being a Cape Cod native. There was an element of, am I trying to exploit this
Mm-hmm.
case or this story for personal or financial gain? So I spent a good amount of time just letting people know these are my intentions. This is why I'm doing this, and the end result has been there. So at the end of the day, I stand by my word that I wasn't trying to do something just to build up my Facebook followers or to make a couple of dollars. My goal was really what has happened just in the last month and a half with this case. So, with that said, I think anybody today, if you're a politician, of course you have to defend yourself every day. But for an artist, it still shocks me that people have to defend their art in this modern day.
Yeah, no question about it. Frank, we have so many more questions to ask you. I know Stephen has some question to ask you, and we want to get into the recent developments in the case, but we got to take a break first. So would you hang in there with us?
I'm here.
Awesome. We'll be right back. And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Helix. I'm your host, Coach Helix. With me, my wonderful co-host,
Hey, Stephen Frederick.
Stephen the Medium, attorney. Stephen the Medium is here. And we also have the legendary executive producer and director, Frank Duran, who produced the documentary about Lady of the Dunes. And if you are well, anywhere really in the world today. In the U.S., you probably heard the recent headlines about the developments in this case. So, Frank, welcome back. And thank you for being here with us. Now, Stephen, you have a couple of questions?
Well, listen, one of the things that I was just, because I wasn't there every single second, but I got to see exactly what was brought to the table, how it was brought to the table with the filming and whatnot. And I'm in awe that Frank, what you accomplished in getting the Meads boys to sit down and be interviewed, and being in the house they grew up, and settling that with the women that own the house. It's remarkable what you did. But one thing I've never asked you, and Frank and I talk like every 5 minutes during the day. He's like my best friend. But every one question I never asked is, Frank, how does when you look at this documentary, how does it compare to the experiences that you've had in your profession with other filming?
It's a good question. Well, I hate to compare a serious documentary to a bad horror film that I did many years ago, but when you set out to do a movie, you got to ask yourself, what's the goal? Like I did a campy horror film called Kill a Campout. And I said, all right, let's have fun. Let's produce something that makes people laugh and scare people and just have a good time, and hopefully we'll break even at the box office. Doing this documentary, the goal was, let's see if we could solve the murder, find out who the murderer was, find out this woman's identity. But you mentioned a good part of this where we got to film the Mead brothers in the home where not only did their father pass away, but this house that they grew up as children. And part of me felt during the production, am I really supposed to be making a documentary, or was I trying to bring peace to these boys who, they lost their father many years ago? Because we could have done a documentary, Stephen, just on the interaction you had speaking through with their father at their dinner table in their house over in Provincetown. And we took that 90-minute interview and only showed 2 minutes of that just to respect the privacy of the family. So you got to ask yourself, even while you're making a movie, what's the goal? Are we trying to influence and educate an audience? Are we here strictly just to entertain? Or, are we on a crusade? Are we trying to change the hearts and minds of people? So lately, everything I do, I question myself, because if I don't truly care, that's the big thing. It's like it's hard for me to do anything creatively unless I really care and want to, sign my name to something. Otherwise, it'd be half-assed and just a waste of my time. So it's doing this project. It was a 2-year investment from start to finish.
Well, you know what, Frank? I will tell you something that last night they had a piece on Chronicle that Jimmy Meads was on. So he had emailed me last week just to tell me that, this was going to be airing and he was going to be filmed in it. And so we emailed each other, and then we emailed each other last night and this morning. And I'll tell you, your objective of what you just spoke about was completely met and then some, because like what you gave these two boys, these two brothers, based on what they knew their father was longing for, to solve this crime. It's again, it's something that there's no words to it. So Frank, wow.
I also think that you accomplished many of the goals that you just, talked about, because you did bring peace to this family. There's no question about it. I was there. I was listening. I was sitting in the background listening to Stephen, engage them in this conversation with their father. And there's no question in my mind that brought them a whole lot of peace. And it was something that perhaps was necessary for them. Now, Frank, in October, I believe it was October of this year, the FBI and the local police had a news conference where they made an announcement of recent breakthroughs in the case. You want to talk about, what has happened since the production of the documentary?
Well, even leading up to that, I have had multiple conversations with Stephen, not every 5 minutes, but every 5 days or so.
Well, actually, hold on.
In my head, Frank. In my head.
No. If you weren't straight, I'd be very concerned about your relationship with Stephen, because it's like two girlfriends on the phone for, not 5 minutes. Let's just put it that way. But anyways, go ahead, Frank.
No, that's a fair assessment. I'll write that down in my little black book. Well, the fact is, months leading up to the October announcement, we interviewed Stephen and you at St. Peter's Cemetery. And, Stephen, you kept telling me that the Lady of the Dunes was telling you, showing you like a rose blossoming or things were taking shape, that you kept telling me months up to this announcement that something's happening, Frank. Things are moving forward. So, you know, and she wasn't lying. So I think she knew deep down with everything that was happening, an endpoint was coming soon. And, you know, that endpoint was a last-minute announcement by FBI and state police that they discovered this woman's identity with the use of using forensic DNA technology.
So now we know who she is, right?
We not only do we have a name, but we have a history. And many of the people I spoke to in law enforcement kept telling me if they had their choice, they would want to know her name rather than who murdered her. Because once they had her identity, they could find out, well, who was she last seen with, who was she married to, and then as soon as we found her identity, we know who her killer would have been within days. And sure enough, as soon as this went live on Monday, the 31st of October, by November 2nd, all this information kept coming out about her past marriages and relationships and where she was and how she got to Provincetown. So one of the things I got upset about is Stephen did mention in his notes, you can see it briefly in the documentary, but he said, my killer's name began with a J or a G. And all of us didn't even think about the letter G. We kept thinking about J for James Whitey Bulger. We thought, it's Bulger. It's got to be Bulger. Oh, my God. And none of us thought about the name with the G, which ended up to be Guy Moldavin. So, Stephen, a year and a half ago, you pretty much got that information from the lady and gave us the information. Unfortunately, it hit the cutting room floor.
But Stephen, explain to people who are listening, explain why the G and the J. How did you get the information from a spirit perspective?
Well, I think a couple of days in April, as Frank mentioned, April 2021, a couple of days before I was set to film, I went by myself to Race Point Dunes, to the beach, to the area, around the area where I had never been to the exact area where she was found. But I just sat and I meditated and I asked her to step forward. And one of the things I do is called a whisper in a note. And I asked her to stand next to me and dictate to me what she wanted me to put in the note. And of course I was asking questions. But at one point I said to her, Lady of the Dunes, who killed you? And she said the name, his first name started with, and I don't see letters, I hear them. And I just heard her kept saying it starts with the J. And I mean, I do enough readings that I know when I hear that it's a G or a J, because many names can be spelled either G or J. I wasn't really sure, so I knew it was one of those letters because they're so similar, and that's how I got it. And I wrote, everything else that was in the note, and including how I asked her how to sign it. And, she signed her first letter. She signed it, the note ends with an R-A-D, and her name is Ruth. The A and D, I don't know yet what that is, but again, I'm sure at some point it will come up.
But you also got some additional validations recently.
I did. I didn't even speak to Frank about this. That when Jimmy Meads told me about last night, I taped the Chronicle so that I could watch it and you could watch it, Elix, because I know you weren't available at 7:30, whatever. But as the Chronicle was it was a great segment, and I don't know if you watched it, Frank, but Othram, the DNA company that actually made this, this sort of development to find out this DNA and genealogy piece. Her name is Kristen Middleton. So part of my letter, in the note, I asked what Lady of the Dunes initials were, and she said either CAM or KAM. And Kristen Middleton, the woman who spoke last night in the Chronicle, and just said that I guess the DNA was. They used the DNA a couple of times that was unsuccessful. I just think it's pretty incredible that Lady of the Dunes had me write those initials, and this woman who is the owner, the CEO of this company, his name is, we know at least KM. I don't know what her middle initials are, but just it's pretty amazing.
No, I agree. I'm the best out of the Chronicle. I disagree with some of the things and some of the people involved with the segment. However, getting to see Chief Meads being interviewed and hearing his voice, that made the episode for me, because I just kept thinking back to Chief Meade's investing decades of his life in taking this case to the grave. And, he deserves more credit than he's been given. And I'm glad they showed it, his grave, and included his son, because at the end of the day, that was his profession, and he should be honored and remembered for his investment for not only the town, but especially with his story.
No, this question is for both of you. Why do you think it took so long to get a break in this case?
Steve, you can go first.
Listen, Elix, that's the $1,000,000 question. I will say, and I'm going to hand it over to Frank, I will say that I think it's in the note. I don't know if this is in the note or just conversation with Frank, what Lady of the Dunes told me, that there was just so many collaterals that were sort of helping or covering this up. So I think that's part of it, and that's what I got, and I'll just defer to Frank.
All right. Well, I could be very bitter and mention a lot of incompetence or personalities or just issues with politics, but I won't. The highlight or my reward for this was I got to have multiple conversations with the son of the Lady of the Dunes. He's recently done some interviews. He was contacted by the New York Times. I won't repeat anything from the conversations I've had with him, but just knowing that her life didn't end in the dunes back in 1974. She has lineage. She has a family. She has her name. And at the end of the day, for my contribution, for my efforts and my time, I was rewarded, and I was given closure by having a conversation with Richard. So with that said, it all worked out in the end. Whether this case could have been solved years ago, at the end of the day, we're here today.
And one last thing I will add, Elix, I'm sorry to interrupt, though.
That's okay.
That I will tell you, I told you, Elix, and I told you, Frank, countless times, that I'm telling you, the moment I tuned in to Lady of the Dunes, one of the things that she started with is how much she loved Frank. That she knew that Frank, in spirit, has an opinion, and that she knew where Frank was coming from, his intentions, like his passion about this. And I knew at that point, and that's why I was telling Frank, and Frank, you mentioned that she kept saying, Frank, hold on, there's other developments, it's coming. It's because of how she also felt about Frank. Whether it was a different person, a different guy, a different woman who did the documentary, and whether the results would have happened the same, I got to be honest, I'm not really sure. I think this was all to do with the essence of Frank. I'm telling you.
Thank you. Well, I've had to go back, too, and look at my notes because I've missed so much from people's interviews to information from every psychic and medium I used. Everyone brought something to the table. And going back to the RAD, almost a year later, I brought my uncle Richard to the grave with another psychic from Cape Cod, Susan Ahern. And my Uncle Richard helped Susan go into the dunes. Susan couldn't get in there without my uncle there walking her to the location where her body was found. And then later we went to the gravesite, and I went through all my notes. And I go, what does RAD mean, Susan? And my uncle says, well, that's me, Frank. That's my initials, Richard Anthony D'Agostino. And then Susan called me up days after when her name was announced and said, Frank, do you remember I said that she told me I'm so happy that Richard is here? Meaning Richard was also the name of her son that she knew of. I can't get into the whole story, but I just felt we were constantly scratching we were right on the edge of getting all these facts for the story. Of course, we were just coming very close, but with the spiritual side and the private investigation, the notes from the law enforcement, the science also came through in the end. So all three areas that we included into this narrative, everything was connecting the dots to the point where we were going to get resolution from this if it all came together. And I pride myself, Stephen, that you brought that spiritual side along with everybody else to fully tell this woman's story.
Oh, thank you.
It's amazing. We've got to take another break, but Frank, stay there with us because I want to talk about the DVD that has been recently released. I want to talk about the upcoming book that Christopher Sutherland is writing, and I want to talk to you about what other projects you are taking on. So we'll be right back. And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Get a Grip with Coach Elex. I'm your host, Coach Elex. With me, my wonderful co-host,
Stephen, the medium.
Attorney Medium, and my husband is here. And also, if you have been paying attention to the local and national news, you probably heard the headlines about the recent developments on the oldest unsolved murder case in Massachusetts in Provincetown, Lady of the Dunes, and we have the privilege to be talking to Frank Duran, who is the executive producer and director of the documentary that was released back in April of 2020. Now, Frank, welcome back.
Thank you.
Everyone has been waiting for this documentary to be finally available because we know a lot of people who want to watch the documentary, and it was released very limitedly in local theaters in Cape Cod, in Provincetown, but now everyone will have access to getting the DVD. How can they get the DVD, and when will it be available?
Well, there's a few ways. If you have a library card, the Attleboro, Norton, amongst with about 10 other locations throughout Cape Cod, has a free copy for people to view on DVD. My cinematographer, Tyler Bellinger, he should be releasing it on YouTube sometime before the end of the year. And if you want to order a copy of yourself, there are pre-ordering copies now through Alpha Video, which is distributing the film through one of their sister companies, oldies.com. So it's going to be available pretty much everywhere before the end of this year.
Absolutely amazing. Now, would you, given all the stuff that we just talked about and all of these developments, would you consider doing a follow-up to your documentary?
Will there be a sequel?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. And I say that out of respect because I have signed on to do some podcasts. I'm being interviewed by you both right now. What would the goal be? Because, do I want to, entertain the idea of looking into the murder, the murderer? I think the goal has been met. I think she has her name back, where not just a murder, her identity was stolen from her. And I just can only imagine this woman not only being murdered, but just being out in the dunes for weeks and not even just being totally taken away from society, no one even knowing that her body is there. We've made up for that in the last 50 years. Law enforcement, local journalists, local historians, everybody has kept this woman's story alive. And for that, the story has really, even though the story will continue in 2023 with some developments with the family and the ongoing investigation with law enforcement, I think pretty much we've come to the conclusion of what her story is all about.
Okay. Having said that, our friend, Christopher Sutherland, who you have been mentoring and you've given a lot of support, he's writing a book, and he has, he has the liberty of now also adding the follow-up to the story. So why Christopher? Like, what was it about him that you decided, I'm going to help this guy, do this book? Use use the information that you build in your documentary, and you giving him a pathway to an amazing book.
Well, it's the same way I found Stephen or my private investigators that worked on the case. Everybody who signed on wanted to be a true labor of love. I had over 20 psychics interested in being a part of this. Law enforcement, we had about 5 or 6 throughout New England. And for local authors, I want to say we had the same amount of interested parties, where when Christopher and I met and he told me about his history about being I want to say 14th or 15th Cape Cod generation from Mayflower, and for the vast work he had done on other stories throughout Cape Cod, I just saw this as a perfect fit. So Christopher's actually built out a website, ladyofthedunes.com, and he's trying to include everything that's Lady of the Dunes, from every news article, photo, video, interview, podcast. So he's taken on the reins of not just producing this, well booked for 2023, but he also wants to keep this story and legacy alive of having a website with anything.
I have the privilege to have Christopher. He's going to be our guest next week. So if you want to know more about the story, what he's up to, and that Christopher is so passionate about this subject that I cannot wait to have him here next week. Right, Stephen?
I can't wait also.
So, Frank, you have other projects, of course, as an independent filmmaker. What are you working on? What else are you working on?
Well, part of my job is to wait for the phone to ring, so I'm very interested in being contacted again for any feature film project. But my family and I were planning on going to Paris back in March of 2020, and then the entire world shut down for COVID. So I'm hoping to finally see Paris before the end of next year. And a project I wanted to do with my son, who is just 4 years old, I grew up watching The Red Balloon, the French short film that's been everywhere. I just love the vision of videoing my son on the streets of Paris handing out red balloons to people. So
I love it.
It's a passion project, absolutely. Do I want to capture my son on film at that age and just kind of passing on beauty and letting strangers just receive a balloon? Seeing Paris is one thing, and going to the restaurants and having coffee in the paths of Hemingway. But anything I do moving forward, I want to be proud of it and try to create some beauty and tell a story along the way. So if that's in the guidelines, I'm all about doing that for any feature film project.
Frank, is that connected to Bansky, the red balloon?
No, it's funny you should say that. Bansky has a famous mural, if you want to call it that, with a red balloon.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, in the 1950s, this movie came out, and there was almost a conspiracy theory because every elementary school in the world was showing this French short movie about this little boy and his beauty with relationship with this red balloon. And if you see it, it's free on YouTube. You can watch it. It was an Academy Award Best Short Film. But I just kind of see now in the world we live in, I would love to see a return of that red balloon and what it symbolizes for youth, innocence, inner beauty, looking through the world through the eyes of a child. And right now I'm in talks with several film students out in Paris. We'd love to film this just to kind of collaborate and just produce a beautiful film of just showing some beauty. And so initially going into this documentary, I've been trying to produce a murder mystery serial. So and I'm still trying, that's on the back burner along with 10 other projects of mine. But at the end of the day, hopefully my paths will cross with good people and I get to produce good content. And when that day comes, I look forward to yelling action.
I love it.
And we look forward to watching what's next for you. Stephen, we're at the top of the hour. Do you have any parting questions, comments, feedback for Frank?
No, I am forever thankful for what you did for me, Frank, and allowing me to be in my first documentary and this just incredible experience. And I will say that whatever you put your fingers on, I know it's just magic and it's going to be incredible.
I'm just happy to discover your middle name is Frederick.
That's right. Isn't you're connected to a Frederick, right?
Well, no, we have the Polish connection, and plus you lived in Norton. I currently live in Norton, but you got this wonderful Irishness about you that keeps that keeps coming up for some odd reason. So that having your middle name Frederick definitely tells a story.
And that was my grandfather from Ireland that's how I was named after my two grandfathers, and Frederick was the guy right from Ireland, Frank. So you're right on the money.
I just have a question. Did you just discover that today, listening to the show?
I did. I did not know that till the show.
So you mean to tell me? You guys talk, countless times for a long time, and this is the first time you discover that his middle name is Frederick.
I thought his middle name was The.
Unbelievable. Frank, how can people get a hold of you?
I'm easy to find. If you Google me, I'll come up.
There you go. So Frank Duran, executive producer, director, Lady of the Dunes. Lady of the Dunes is going to be available December 31st on DVD 2022. You can pre-order at oldies.com. Frank, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your time and your attention with us so generously. And we look forward to next week's show where we're going to have...
Thank you, Frank.
Christopher Sutherland.
Love you guys.
Thank you,
Take
Frank.
care.
Thank you. So, Stephen, we're at the top of the hour. Do you want to remind people how they can get a hold of you?
StephenTheMedium.com.
StephenTheMedium.com. And you do have an event coming up on December 18th in New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Yes.
It's a limited attendance event, right? So
yes. Just go to my website and check me out.
And if you want to follow me, which you should be following me, Coach Elex on anywhere on social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or LinkedIn, you got it. Just put in Coach Elex and I'm going to pop up. And again, thank you, Mark, for producing our show. As always showing up. And thank you, all of you, for listening and for your support time and time again. And we'll see you again next week. Christopher Sutherland, who is the writer, who's writing a book about Lady of the Dunes. You do not want to miss that show. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.